I know there's probably more truth behind closed doors that we are not privy to, and nobody's gonna tell us. Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Alexis, and on this channel I cover important takeaways that I get from viral topics. Today I wanted to talk about Quiet on Set, the dark side of kids TV. Quiet on Set is a documentary that came out about Nickelodeon, kind of describing all the horrible things that were going on behind the scenes while they were filming all of the very famous and very popular shows that aired at the time. I'm gonna go ahead and say this. I was always a Disney Channel kid. I have never been a Nickelodeon kid, so I'm not familiar with those shows at all. Now, Nickelodeon was very popular, but I was always a Disney Channel kid. I just never cared for Nickelodeon like that. Like when I was young, I looked at Nickelodeon as some kind of like low tier version of Disney Channel. Like to me, Disney Channel had all the better shows. Like it was funnier. And now this documentary has me wondering if there's any secret about Disney that is being kept. Because I know even when I was young, there were all kind of rumors coming out about a lot of Disney child stars. I remember there was the rumor about Vanessa Hudgens' nudes leaking. I really hope that if there's anything predatory that happened to some of the Disney kids, especially in Disney, they can come out and speak. Even though I feel like because Disney Channel or just Disney in general was kind of, again, in my opinion, they're kind of bigger. Like it's a bigger company. Like there's just so much more heavy hitters behind it. Making sure that your image stay clean. I don't think if anybody has something to say about Disney, they will come out and just say it. I feel like Disney is very protected, way more protected than Nickelodeon. That's why it was so easy for some of these people to come out and tell the truth the way they did. Because even on the show, some of the writers, I think a couple of the female writers that spoke on the in the documentary mentioned that a lot of people have similar experiences. They're just afraid to come out. Nonetheless, people still came out and spoke on Nickelodeon. So just to tell you that there's still some room for the truth to come out, I don't even think there's that little bit of a room for Disney people to come and speak the truth. So with that being said, let's get into my important takeaways, shall we? And just FYI, disclaimer, if you haven't watched it and you don't want any spoilers, I would just suggest, come back to the video at a later time after you watched it because it's going to be a bunch of spoilers in this video. Episode 1 starts with people talking about Dan Schneider. I feel like even though he has so many horrible things attached to his name and so many people have all these negative experiences with him, I feel like people are kind of giving him grace. That's just my opinion. The documentary starts with people talking about his childhood. So he was always the fat kid, and they say he grew up in a rich family. He comes from money, and he always felt like he was, kind of left out. He felt like he was the nobody of the family, and his family didn't really have high hopes for him, and he wanted to prove them wrong. So he went into acting, and when that started working out, he just kept, going, following that route. Pretty much, it's almost as if when we focus so much on the criminal's background, we are kind of justifying why they did some of the things that they did. But one of the journalists specifically mentioned that he had arrested development. Okay, like again, terms like that make it seem justifiable to, you know, go after people or like hurt people because if something traumatic happened to you, like people describe him, he was, the fat kid. So if being the fat kid got him bullied, made him feel ostracized from even his own family, still doesn't justify him doing that to other people. And I just wanted to say that the way some of the people in the documentary was talking about his background just made it seem like, okay, being who he was made sense. Being, this person who abused other people made sense because this is where it comes from. And I know, I'm pretty sure that wasn't your intention, but that's how it came across. And speaking of arrested development, I have also heard that when you go through something very traumatic as a child, you can stay there like mentally, like you never grow past that until you can find a way to heal. And sometimes I wonder, while I was watching the documentary, I was wondering if Dan Schneider was also ever abused, not just emotionally, but maybe even physically. I know the documentary had to go on and we had to focus on the actual Nickelodeon kids, but if you're going to talk about his background, I want us to be able to have names of family members who might have put him through that. But I'm pretty sure Dan Schneider himself would want to talk about it, since he also ended up benefiting from the same bullying tactics that got him hurt in the first place. Sometimes, when I was watching the documentary, I just wondered, we over here talking about him, growing up in money, but I want to know the people who first traumatized him. That's what I wanted to know. So now, fast forward, episode one also. That's when we get introduced to Raquel Ballou, from the Amanda Show, and Katrina Johnson. Katrina Johnson was not on the Amanda Show from what I recall, but she was one of the OGs at Nickelodeon. She almost had a show before Amanda came about, which, by the way, Amanda Bynes is one of those people who put Nickelodeon on the map. So yeah, I'm pretty sure we all know that, but she did. But before her, there was somebody whose career was very promising and who could have been the Amanda Bynes before Amanda Bynes, and that was Katrina Johnson, based on the way she was talked about in the documentary. So apparently, Dan Schneider noticed her and he wanted her to work with him. And he gave her a lot of attention and he promised her a show. While she was talking and I was remembering Amanda Bynes, I couldn't help but to think, wow, this woman, Katrina Johnson, like, she dodged a huge bullet. Because when she was describing her like relationship with Dan Schneider, it's like the same things that he would do for and to Amanda Bynes, he was doing the exact same thing to Katrina herself. So she talked about how he was spending a lot of time with her, and then one day he promised her that she was going to have her own show, the Katrina Johnson show, which is very nice. That was probably going to bring her acting career to the next level. But that never happened. Why? Because right when she was, I don't remember what show she was on. I believe it was All That. I don't know. So right before the chance came about, her getting her own show, some of the producers called her mom and said she was getting too big and she was getting too fat. How funny. Coming now, I don't know if Dan himself, he probably has something to do with that phone call. So very funny how somebody who looked the way he did. I mean, he lost some weight now, but very funny how somebody who looked the way he did would call a little teenage girl fat. And I don't even think she was a teenage girl yet. She was like 12 when that phone call happened. So he called, told her she was getting fat, and then right after that, she hit puberty, like she described. And then she claims that her relationship with Dan just started vanishing, and he didn't like her anymore. And the first thing that I was thinking about when she was talking, the man just liked little girls, and he did not get to abuse her right before she became a woman. He doesn't like women. He likes little girls, and he hates women, maybe because he thinks women are tainted and already destroyed, but he wants to be able to be the one to destroy the little girl who eventually will become a woman. That's how I interpreted everything that was being said. So he didn't have a chance to abuse Katrina before she stepped into womanhood. When she was becoming a woman, maybe she was becoming too old for him to be around, so he discarded her. I don't think she realized how much of a bullet she dodged. if everything that came out about Amanda Bynes later on is true, that man did a number on Amanda. And if you think about it, his first favorite was Katrina Johnson. She probably would have been the one going through what Amanda is going through right now. She does a huge bullet, and even though I'm sure she would have wanted an acting career, I hope she I hope this is one of those moments for her where she realizes that you cannot be jealous or envious of anything that somebody else has, because you just never know what comes with it. Another person who was introduced to me in episode 1 was Raquel Ballou. So she was on the Amanda show. I don't know, I feel like they skipped over her too quickly. She did not really get into much details as to what her relationship with Dan was. The only example that she had was when she had a birthday party and they bought her like a really big square cake, and Dan was mad and he said the cake was too big and he lashed out. Now that is horrible, but that was not a personal interaction. I just wanted to get more into her story, like Raquel Ballou. Like, we never really talked about her story. I wanted to know more about what she was noticing on set, like her own interaction. She also mentioned that she was very close with Drake Bell, which we're gonna talk about him later. It wasn't, there was. I wanted to hear more about her story. Yeah, I wanted to hear more about her story. But yeah, she had that one example with the cake. I feel like they just kind of rushed by. I hope they did not just ignore some of the important stories that she might have had, like personal stories, like personal interaction with Dan. I hope they just didn't skip over stories, because I just feel like there's probably so many things that they could have, included. I personally think there was like an element of racial bias when it comes to Raquel Ballou that didn't get talked about. Now, if the racial bias wasn't there, obviously you cannot make up scenarios. She added something to the documentary. I just know that there were personal stories that she didn't talk about or they did not show on the documentary. So that's just my take on her. Yeah, I wish I would have heard more from her. Also, in episode 1, we get introduced to Christy and Jenny. Those are the two female writers that he made split one salary, and they just wanted the opportunity, so they took it. But that was illegal, and that was going against the Writers Guild. Those two women are the prime example of how Dan Schneider really, really hated women, even though he liked being around little girls. Episode 2 starts off with this lady named MJ. MJ is an older woman. She is there to talk about her experience with her daughter Brandy. Now, I tried to Google if Brandy was still alive, and I couldn't find any sign of her not being alive anymore. The reason why I say that is because MJ, the mom, brought the story to the documentary, but her daughter was not there to pretty much speak for herself. I don't know why. Maybe the daughter didn't want to be recognized, which is fine. But I really wish I would have heard from the daughter, because MJ pretty much told the story. But let's keep in mind, she told her side of the story. Maybe there were other details that Brandy could have provided. She gets into details about how she ended up with her daughter in show business. So MJ herself talks about how her mother, so Brandy's grandmother, was a legal assistant in show business, and she never wanted MJ to be part of show business. Apparently, she never told them why, because when MJ became a mom and Brandy wanted to be on the Amanda show, in MJ's words, she said, "I was happy to give my child what she wanted in life." So MJ's mom never let her get into show business as a child, and she had resentment towards her mom for that. But the thing is this, her mom never told her what was happening in show business. And this is the thing when it comes to parents who sometimes stop their children from doing things that they believe are dangerous for them, it's always important to let your kids know why you don't want them doing certain things. Your kids have the emotional capacity to understand why you think something is not good for them. Please stop lying to kids. Because if MJ's mom had just told her why she didn't want her kids or her grandkids to be in showbiz, maybe MJ would have never allowed her daughter to be in showbiz. Fast forward to, years later, MJ has her own daughter, Brandy, and then she has on the Amanda show, and that's when things start going gross. Like, this is when we start talking about predatory behavior on the show. When we are introduced to Handy, I think that's his last name, the production assistant Handy. So he was just a nice guy, like a regular smuggler, nice guy. And then, in the words of MJ, one day he sends a photo of him touching himself. He sends that photo to Brandy saying that he's thinking of her, and that's how he's thinking of her. MJ says she felt guilty and she didn't call the cops because she didn't want people to think she was a bad mom. And I can't speak, I don't like to be that person who says, well, if I was her, because you never really know how you will react if you are somebody or you are in somebody's shoes. But the lesson to learn there is that if something is not working, you cannot worry too much about your image. You have to make sure that nobody else get hurt, because while she decided to not really open up about what Handy was sending to her daughter, he was doing that to other people. Episode 2, we also get introduced to Tracy and Brian Herney, if I'm not mistaken, that's your name. So Tracy and Brian are mom and son. I don't remember what show Brian was on, but he gets introduced with his mom. When I listen to your story, Tracy and Brian, this reminds me of how sometimes, as people of color, specifically black people, sometimes get like pinned against each other, because Dan Schneider never liked Brian, in Brian's own words. And when Brian says, or Brian and Tracy admit that when he eventually got fired after that one season, I don't remember what show again, but when he got fired after that one season, he blamed his mom. When Brian gets introduced, he talks about how when he got casted, he was happy because he thought he was finally gonna get his family out of the hood. So first and foremost, this type of pressure on little kids, it's never a good thing. It shouldn't be on you as a little 12-year-old boy to worry about taking your mom or your parents out of the hood. I know some people might not want to hear it, because if your child has a talent, why not let them explore that while becoming rich? But that type of pressure on a child is what keeps predators going, because it's very easy to hold somebody's career, dangle their career in front of your face, and tell them that they have to keep putting up with abuse to be able to advance in their career. So when that type of pressure is put on children, it's not fair. We need to let children be children. So when he said that, I didn't like it at all. Tracy, who's Brian's mom, talks about how she was noticing all these things that she did not like. And every time she would open up about it, or every time she would say something, she was being, side-eyed a little bit. The side-eyeing wasn't because she was annoying, it was because she was looking out for her son, just so we're clear. Because that show did not care much about those children's well-being at all. And I think they just wanted to be able to take advantage of the kids in peace. I think Brian himself mentioned that sometimes the show was ignoring child labor laws. So they just wanted to take advantage of the kids in peace. And everybody or anybody who stood in the middle of that was a problem. And there's where we have Tracy, Brian's mom. The reason why I say they remind me of how people of color, especially black people, sometimes spin against each other is because a lot of people of color, specifically black, grew up in a lot of poverty. And a lot of times, young boys at a very young age, when we start talking about things like joining gangs or like trying to get into athleticism, because that's almost like the easy way out. So, a lot of times, boys feel the pressure to get your families out of the hood, like he said. Sometimes they ignore all the danger, and sometimes they ignore the fact that the route that they have to take is not safe because they are pretty much giving your identity and your life to somebody else, like another group, whatever group is in power or whatever your boss is. And a lot of times the women have more clairvoyance. We see things, we feel things. In this case, it was Brian's mom, and she really tried to stand in the way of him getting abused. And every single time she would speak up, she was ostracized, and eventually they ended up throwing both of them out of Nickelodeon. It's pretty much sending a message that if you, as a young boy, Brian, if you wanted to succeed here, you shouldn't have had your mom here. Even as a young boy, that's the message that they were trying to let him know. If you have your mom here, or if you have any woman like your mom who's going to look out for you, both of you cannot be here. You cannot succeed together. And I think that's, that was the underlying message behind him being eventually kicked out. In this case, he went ahead and blamed his mom for a while. It was never her fault, because I think what Brian should have understood was that those people at Nickelodeon never liked you. Because even when we think of Drake Bell, which we're gonna, get into later, when they noticed that his parent was in a way of, him and his predator and abuser, they pretty much found a way to make sure that that parent was out of the picture. They didn't just kick, both of them out. But with Brian, they made sure that him and his mom was kicked out completely. And this is something that happened more often than we think of, or more often than we want to talk about. It's the way sometimes minorities or people of color sometimes being pinned against each other. So you would have somebody who is not very aware being put in positions, and the other person who is part of that person's group, if they want to look out for them, now they're being made feel like they don't have any right to pretty much voice their concern. And if they voice their concern too much, both parties are gonna be rejected. Now it's the fault of the person who really had, their companion's best interest at heart. But truth be told is that the plan was for someone like Brian to never be respected. And he can blame his mom all he wants. His mom can blame herself all she wants, but they were gonna get kicked out eventually, because sooner or later we get tired of the disrespect. So you were gonna get rejected or kicked out eventually. And I also noticed that in episode 2 there was this guy named Kyle Sullivan. So around this time in episode 2, we're also starting to talk about Brian Peck, who Brian Peck is, Drake Bell's abuser. So Kyle Sullivan, to me, he's just that kid. Well, he's a man now, but Kyle is that person who is a witness, but nothing has ever happened to him. Because even in episode 2, Kyle had mentioned that he had a very good relation with Dan, while Brian and all the other kids, well, not even all the other kids, while Brian and some of the other black cast members all had issues with Dan, Kyle didn't. And even Brian in episode 2 mentioned that that was a very clear thing, that Dan wasn't messing with the black kids like that on the show. So episode 3, Kyle talks about when he started being very suspicious, specifically of Brian Peck. He talked about when they went to his, like, Brian Peck's house for like something, and then Brian Peck showed him some of the letters and the paintings that he was receiving from the serial killer John Wayne Gacy. To me, Kyle is the example of how not everybody is going to be a victim of a specific abuser, because we still need somebody who's going to be able to say that everything that happened didn't happen to them. All the other cast members, especially black, especially the women, were already facing all these issues with Dan. Kyle was the little kid who didn't really have anything negative to say about Dan. So he reminds me of that, person who's just there and who never goes through as much abuse as some of the other kids, because when the truth start coming out, they can count on him to say, well, I don't know what you all are talking about. I've never been through anything. Now, when Brian picked into the picture, he messed that up because he told him that he was pen pals with a serial killer. So that's when that kind of made Kyle Sullivan suspicious of just Nickelodeon in general. In episode 2, we also have this staff member named Virgil. Yes, so Virgil was on set, and I put him in almost the same category as Kyle Sullivan. He didn't go through too much with Dan, but he eventually talked about this incident where he got fired, and Dan Schneider did not fire him face to face. Dan Schneider had somebody tell him to leave and not come back. And this is how you know that he didn't really have that much of an issue with Dan, because as he's describing the issue, like as he's describing the way he got fired, he seemed to have a problem with the fact that Dan did not fire him face to face. And this is how sometimes things go in the workplace. There's those people who they're never mistreated, so they're the people who are gonna be able to make it seem like there was no abuse in a certain workplace if the truth ever comes out. They're just people who just never had to go through much. So with Virgil, the way he was kind of offended that Dan Schneider did not fire him face to face just kind of told me what I needed to know about him. That he was nice to everybody, but he didn't really care much about other people's experience, because Dan was nasty to so many other people on the staff, especially the women. Like, what made him think that Dan was gonna respect him a little more? And this is the thing about a lot of people who sometimes feel like they cannot be abused, is that sometimes some people get too big where they feel like they do not relate to people who get abused. So if you see something wrong going on, just look the other way, because it's less likely going to happen to you. And I saw Virgil as one of those people. As we are approaching episode 3, one of the people interviewing him says that a lot of sex abuse was happening at Nickelodeon. And his reaction is that, well, it didn't happen to one of our sets, didn't it? And then the journalist is like, yes, it happened. It was one of the kids on one of your shows. And he looks very surprised. And again, I'm not trying to be too harsh on him, but sir, why are you surprised? It's like you already know that your former friend Dan Schneider is a horrible person. At this point, based on how you were treated, you shouldn't be surprised that something like this could be happening. He just seemed a little surprised, and I was kind of doubtful of how surprised he was. There's a part of me that feels like he's somebody who would know these things going on set, and he would just take it for granted. So now he's sitting there, somebody's telling him, I assume for the first time, that the abuse that was going on set was actually going on in one of the shows that he was working on. And he's just standing there like, he just kind of made that face. He's surprised. So I'm just like, so you really couldn't tell that nothing was going on? That's like my, thought process when I'm looking at him. Like, I don't feel like he really didn't know what was going on. I think he's one of those people who just swept it under the rug. Like, he just saw something was off and then he ignored it. So now episode 3, Drake Bell and his dad starts your commentary during episode 3. Episode 3 starts off with Drake Bell sitting down and introducing himself a little bit, and he talks about his acting career. And one thing that I've noticed while he was talking was how he was still smiling while thinking about his acting career. So his dad started by saying that when he was young, like really young, him and his wife, like Drake Bell's mom, were going through a divorce. He also sounded like him and his ex-wife weren't really like getting along like that. Drake Bell just sounded like the perfect victim. Broken homes. I feel like what made Drake the perfect victim for someone like Brian Peck was that he seemed like this type of kid who would never go tell his parents what's going on because maybe he don't want to disappoint them. That's the vibe that I got from just his pictures. Obviously, I could be wrong, but his pictures and some of the interviews that were shown during the documentary, he just seemed like such a sweet, like sweet little. I don't want to say sweet little, but he just seemed like such a sweet person who doesn't want to bother anybody. Perfect victim for predator. Like even when you are in school, the people who get bullied the most are the people who never really say anything. The quiet ones get picked on and bullied the most because they will never go tell. They will just keep it to themselves. So that's the vibe that I got from Drake. Broken home, even if he's close to his dad, is still perfect victim because apparently the parents are not getting along. Now, fast forward to when he gets into how the abuse started. Brian Speck's strategy was to kind of separate him from his dad, who his dad was really somebody who looked out for him. Brian Peck eventually convinced Drake that his dad was stealing his money. That's how Drake ended up wanting to be around his mom or wanted to live with his mom. Before you know it, Brian is over here trying to get Drake to live with him while going to auditions and things like that because I think Drake says his parents' house or his dad's house where he was living was in Orange County, and he all the auditions were happening in LA. So if you live in Southern California, that's like an hour away, sometimes an hour and a half, or even 2 hours with traffic. I went on the Drake Bell's comment section and I saw one comment that was saying that I just want to talk to your mom for a little bit. I understand why people don't like that woman, but I wish she was on the documentary to give her side of the story because I really want to hear her side. Like, I want to hear from her. Drake was under her supervision when she allowed him to pretty much move in with Brian Peck as he was going to auditions. And from what was told on the documentary, Drake's dad told his ex-wife to watch out for Brian because he did not like him, he did not trust him. Drake was under her supervision when she allowed him to be around Brian. And that's when the abuse started. And that lasted for like what, a year or so? Almost a year, if I'm not mistaken. So I really wanted Drake's mom to be there to talk about her side and to just kind of explain what exactly did Brian tell her for her to fall for his charm. Like, what did he say to her that was so charming that she just kind of let all her guards down and let her underage son go with just a random man that is not his father? Apparently, when he gets to court, Brian Peck's entire side of the courtroom is full, while Drake only has his mom, his dad, and his brother. Just to show you how evil the industry can be. Because there's no way people are going to convince me that all the people who sat there on his side of the courtroom didn't know who he was. I'm not sure if everybody knew he was an abuser, but I'm pretty sure a few people knew. I'm pretty sure some of his abuser predator friends were also sitting there on his side of the courtroom. They knew who he was. They knew each other. And he also had 41 letters of support sent to the judge at the time. And it was said that Dan Schneider never sent a letter of support, but I'm pretty sure Dan Schneider supported his buddy in different ways. Those letters of support all said he was innocent, and some of them even accused Drake of being the one who initiated this predatory behavior against him. So the victim blaming of it all. Even after that, Drake had to go back to work. And then Brian Peck was sentenced to 16 months probation, which is pretty much not a lot. And he eventually ended up working on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody on Disney Channel. I know Disney spend a lot of money protecting your image, so people don't really come out against Disney like that. So I guess we might never know. But it's 2024, everybody's getting exposed, so hopefully somebody can say something about Disney. I also noticed that Drake didn't have many bad things to say about Dan Schneider. During the documentary, he said that he trusted Dan. He said Dan Schneider gave him all the support. Apparently, when the lawsuit was filed, Dan called him and asked if it was him who filed the lawsuit. And when he said yes, Dan told him that he has his back. I don't know why he would trust Dan. I understand why somebody would want to have trust in, like, you just want to trust somebody. You want to be able to trust somebody, and you want to trust somebody who's there for you. But I don't think Dan Schneider is to be trusted. Dan Schneider had enough power to shut his whole career down if he wanted to, and he did not. I don't think Dan was sincerely nice to Drake. I think he did that just to be able to have Drake say that he was nice if something like this, like a documentary like this one, was to come out. My final takeaway is going to be this. I really wish we heard more from Raquel. There was also the actress Giovanni Samuels. I don't know if that's her last name. She also spoke. Again, I feel like the black kids on the show was not. I feel like their storyline was just to be supportive of everybody else's experience. I really wish we would have got into your own personal stories. As the documentary was coming to an end, Giovanni said she dealt with a lot of self-esteem issues due to beauty standards. I wish she had elaborated on that. The whole time, she's not even talking about her personal stories. Even Brian and Tracy, we got to know them, but Raquel and Giovanni, they didn't really, all they did was support everybody else's story. I wish they had a little more shine, that's all. In general, the documentary was very eye-opening. I'm glad they came out with the documentary. I'm glad everybody is speaking the truth. I know there's probably more truth behind closed doors that we are not privy to, and nobody's gonna tell us. So this marks the end of my little review and takeaways from Quiet on Set. If you all would please, on your way out, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, because it's going to be more videos like this to come. I am very happy to have you all here as always, and I will catch you all in the next video. Thank you.